Welcome to the WhereX channel. Before we begin, don't forget to click the subscribe button, enable notifications, and like the video to receive all episodes. Today, we begin a new and exciting series, the beginning of a rock wizard, a terrifying story that will take you on a thrilling journey from the first page to the last. Get ready, mystery and horror will be your companions from the very first moment. I am Rock, a name I inherited from my father, and he inherited it from my grandfather, as if it were a curse passed down from one generation to the next. It wasn't a random name, but a mysterious seal that haunted me wherever I went, a reference to the cursed blood that has run through my veins for centuries. We are not an ordinary family, but a lineage of sorcerers and wizards, steeped in eternal covenants with unseen powers. And each one of us is born carrying a heavy legacy of darkness on our shoulders, from which it is impossible to escape. I remember my childhood well. Our home wasn't like others. Its walls weren't decorated with pictures or paintings, but were covered with strange talismans, dried animal skins, and dolls stuffed with feathers and bones. Its shelves were filled with tattered black books filled with symbols and drawings incomprehensible to the human mind. I didn't have a ball to play with like other children, and I didn't know what it was like to play in the streets. My only toy was a small, bony, cold skull. My father placed it in my hands, smiling cruelly. "This is your future, Rock. Don't run away from it," he said. I grew up watching my father in silence. He spent his nights drawn in intricate circles on the floor, drawing lines with animal blood, or sometimes his own, and repeating words in a tongue so unlike ours that it made the air heavy and the room suffocate. When he lifted his head, would see his eyes glow with a strange color, a color that had nothing to do with humanity. I was still young, but something inside me knew that hidden forces resided among us, whispering in our ears and guiding our steps. It wasn't our ancestors who taught us magic, as I had thought, but the demons themselves. They were the true teachers, the ones who made covenants with us centuries ago, and from that moment on, we were merely extensions of an eternal bargain. Over the years, I grew accustomed to these rituals until they became part of my daily life. I was no longer surprised by the midnight screams that filled the house, nor by the bodies writhing before us as we invoked unbearable curses. I thought this was normal, for a human being to live as a servant of darkness, for your life to be a series of commands carried out for the benefit of entities you cannot see, entities that feed on your fear and your desire for power. But what no one told me was that these spirits were eternally hungry, an insatiable, unquenchable hunger. Every time we fulfilled one of their requests, they demanded another, and every time we lit a small fire, a larger one would ignite. It was as if we were feeding a beast that only grew thirstier. Then came the fateful day. I was 15 years old when my father took me to a room I had never been allowed to enter before. Its door was made of rusty iron, covered in strange patterns that seemed to move the longer I stared at it. My father opened the door slowly, and the sound of its creaking pierced my ears like a scream from another world. He pushed me inside, and there, in the darkness, I saw something I had never imagined. The ground was marked with a massive circle, its lines drawn in fresh blood, glowing with a dim, reddish light. At its center stood a distorted form, the likes of which I had never seen. It was neither human nor animal, but a distorted jumble of limbs twisted, its face covered in shadows, and blazing eyes staring directly at me. I felt as if they were piercing my chest and stealing my breath. My father stood beside me, his voice hoarse, half proud and half cruel. "Today your journey begins, Rock. Today you will make your covenant, just as we made ours before you." My blood froze, and my knees trembled until I could barely stand. Whispers began to fill the room, voices in multiple languages I didn't understand, but which were clear to me, seeping like poison into my soul. The entity in the circle smiled, or perhaps it was just a horrific twist of its distorted face. I didn't know whether it was a welcome or a threat, but I felt my life snap in two at that moment, the life before that night and the life after. I've never forgotten that day. It was the beginning of my entrance into a world from which there was no return. A world that knew no mercy, a world where blood was the only price, and where each new covenant sliced a part of your soul until all that remained was an empty shell serving the darkness. From my earliest childhood, I wasn't an ordinary child like my peers. I didn't laugh heartily like they did, nor did I run carelessly through the alleys. I always felt something dark coursing through my veins, as if a hidden voice from another world was whispering in my ear, guiding me, watching me, and fueling a strange desire within me that I couldn't understand. I saw what no one else could see, heard screams at night that no one else could hear, and watched shadows move in corners even when the place was completely empty. This wasn't an illusion. I was born into a house that had been plagued by magic for generations. My grandfather was a great sorcerer feared and revered by the villagers, and my father inherited the same dark power from him. And here I am, their grandson, carrying the same cursed legacy. It wasn't a choice, it was my destiny. It was as if my blood was sealed with an inescapable stigma, destined to be a new link in a long chain of darkness. I remember the first lessons I received from my father. He stared at me with his cold eyes and said, "Magic, rock, isn't empty words or child's play. It's a contract. An unbreakable contract. If you want power, you must give. If you want to be obeyed, you must first obey." His words were heavy as rocks, terrifying and mesmerizing me at the same time. I didn't understand what he meant that day, but at night I would see him sitting alone in a dark room, drawing strange circles with ash and blood, placing offerings on the fire, and then muttering until his voice changed, sounding like the growling of a monster emerging from the depths of hell. I would hide behind the door, watching, feeling as though I were facing a secret beyond any child's ability to bear. As the years passed, it ceased to be a secret. He began to teach me, little by little, how to write spells with my trembling hands, how to summon spirits to carry out my commands, how to make a man sick for no reason, or a woman hate her husband for no reason. I practiced it, and each time I felt a part of my humanity erode. At first, I would cry secretly at night, but then I got used to it. Gradually, fear turned to curiosity, curiosity to desire, and desire to addiction. My father would see me, and I could see a strange satisfaction in his eyes, as if he saw himself reflected within me. He would pat my shoulder and say, "You're our extension, Rook. The witch flame in our family will never be extinguished." But despite all of this, there was another voice inside me, weak but stubborn. I felt an emptiness growing wider every day, as if I were falling into a bottomless abyss. I would wonder, am I a slave to my inheritance? Am I merely a tool in the hands of demons, to be manipulated wherever they wish? Or could I rebel and break this chain that has bound my family for centuries? I was living a silent struggle. During the day, I practice magic, and at night, I have nightmares haunted by dark faces, my grandfather standing there smiling, watching me from afar, as if to say, "You will not escape." As I approached puberty, the day came that would change my life forever. On a stormy night, my father took me to a locked room I had never been allowed to enter before. Its door was made of rusty iron, dotted with strange inscriptions. He opened it slowly and pushed me inside. There, in the darkness, I saw a large circle drawn in blood, glowing with red threads as if it were pulsating with life. At its center stood a distorted entity, a hybrid of human, animal, and demonic shadow, its eyes blazing with an unquenchable hell. My father approached me, his voice hoarse as he said, "Today your journey begins, Rock. Today you will make your covenant, just as we made ours before you." My blood froze. Whispers filled the room, as if hundreds of souls were whispering in my ear at once. The entity within the circle was smiling, or perhaps growling. I could no longer distinguish. I felt then that my life had been shattered, and that the line separating me from the darkness had been erased forever. I will never forget that day. It was the beginning of my entry into a world from which there was no return. I was no longer that naive boy who opened books without understanding. Instead, I delved into the depths of the pages as if searching for my lost self, for my true features buried among the talismans and burnt letters. I flipped through the ancient manuscripts left behind by my father and grandfather, and as I progressed between the lines, I felt a wall of mystery slowly cracking before me, as if buried secrets were waiting for the right moment to devour me. The manuscripts were dilapidated, their pages yellow and brittle, and they exuded the smell of mold and ash. Strangely, however, when I reached out to them, I felt a warmth creeping through my skin, as if fire were lurking between the lines. It wasn't just a feeling, it was a hidden connection with an invisible force. I placed my hand on one of the pages and felt my pulse race violently, as if the book itself was swallowing my breath. Suddenly, whispering voices reached my ears. They were initially indistinct, like a wind blowing through a narrow corridor. Then, gradually, the words began to emerge. "We are here, we never left, the bloodline is unbroken." My limbs stiffened, and I trembled until I felt the ground shake beneath my feet. I quickly turned around, certain someone was watching me from the shadows, but all I saw were the cold walls of the room, adorned with black cracks that resembled veins extending through the stone. Yet, I knew that what I had heard was not an illusion, but a deep-seated certainty. I continued reading until I came across a page with text different from the rest. It spoke of the first pact, the covenant my grandfather had made with the shadow being centuries ago. The words weren't just a myth, but a real document sealed with a black seal embedded in the paper, a seal whose traces would never fade, as if darkness itself had left its mark there. The manuscript says that my grandfather made a great sacrifice, something that wasn't clearly stated, perhaps a soul, perhaps the blood of our descendants, in exchange for unlimited power. From that moment on, every child born into our family was bound by the same covenant, doomed to follow the same dark path. I read, and every hair on my body trembled, but strangely, fear didn't prevail. On the contrary, a terrifying curiosity was raging inside me, a curiosity stronger than any awe. I was captivated by what I was discovering, as if something in my blood rejoiced the closer I got to these secrets. Indeed, I felt that the more I immersed myself in these mysteries, the more an ancient part of me that had been dormant since my birth was awakened. In a moment of silence, a question occurred to me that had haunted me. Am I the one reading these manuscripts, or are the manuscripts reading me? I didn't find the answer, but I knew that the deeper I delved, the closer I was to the point from which I could never return. The night was unusually still, and the house was suffocating with a heavy silence unlike any I had ever known. Even the hands of the clock seemed to have stopped, and the air itself was stagnant, wrapping itself around my chest like an invisible hand trying to strangle me. I sat alone in the room, the manuscript open before me on a strange page, depicted with a distorted face, eyes glowing like two embers in the darkness of the paper. Underneath the face, I glimpsed a short sentence engraved in dark script, its letters sunk into the paper as if written in dried blood. "Read to awaken, and pray to come." I didn't think long. Curious to the point of stupidity, I mumbled the words between my lips, thinking I was reading just a careless line. Little did I realize that what I had spoken was a ritual that opened doors not meant for humans. Suddenly, everything changed. The air in the room felt heavier, as if a wall of black fog had fallen over me. My breathing became ragged, and the lights began to flicker violently, then went out one by one, until I was plunged into total darkness. The darkness wasn't ordinary, it was thick, tangible, as if a living entity were wrapping itself around me. From the corner of the room, a dark mass began to form, a tall shadow slowly creeping like smoke rising from an inferno. It wasn't just a shadow. It twisted and expanded until it assumed a human form, but its face was featureless, just a black void absorbing my gaze. Then came the voice. It wasn't a voice in the usual sense. It was a mixture of overlapping whispers, the creaking of scraping metal, and a distant wail. All of these sounds combined to form a sentence that pierced my mind. Finally, the heir of blood summoned us with his tongue. I felt sweat dripping from my forehead, and a chill ran through my limbs. I wanted to scream, to run, to open the door, but my feet were like stone. Something strange pulled me to a place, as if a shadow had bound me with invisible threads. However, it wasn't just fear that filled me, but another feeling, an ominous curiosity, an involuntary desire to know more. The mouthless being smiled, and yet I heard a laugh echoing inside my head, a laugh that made my bones tremble. Your father resisted, but failed. Now, you have two choices, to fulfill the covenant, or to be erased from the lineage. He moved closer, and the more he moved, the darkness around him expanded as if the room were swallowing itself up. I could feel his cold touch against my skin, and the smell of ancient rot permeated my nostrils, the scent of deserted graves and fossilized cobwebs. I took a step back, but an inner voice, not mine, whispered clearly to me. Do not run away, this is your destiny. At that moment, I realized the real confrontation had begun. It was no longer just pages and manuscripts, nor mere whispers from the past. They had already been summoned, and the blood that ran through my veins was no longer mine alone. I stood there, torn between resistance and surrender, and I knew that, whether I liked it or not, I had become part of a covenant that was never meant to be made, a world no human being was ever meant to see. I didn't sleep that night, even though my body was exhausted and my mind reeling from the weight of what had happened. The words I'd heard from the mysterious being echoed inside me endlessly, like a broken bell clanging in my head, either you fulfill the covenant, or you will be erased from the lineage. As dawn broke, nothing changed, the fear only grew stranger. The house was immersed in an unfamiliar, heavy silence, as if time had stopped at its threshold. No birdsong, no rustle of wind, even the hands of the clock seemed to be moving deliberately slowly, as if they, too, were waiting for something. I sat by the window, staring at the pale gray horizon. The sun rose slowly but didn't bring light. Instead, it sent a sickly light creeping over the walls like a dead shadow. I returned to the manuscript, trying to understand what had happened. The shock increased when I found the page I'd been reading the day before, blank. No drawing, no letters, no sentence that portended a curse. Just a pale whiteness like cracked skin. I tried to convince myself that what had happened was nothing but an illusion brought on by the night's fatigue, but when I touched the paper with my fingertips, I felt a slight warmth pulsating from the pages, as if they were breathing. Suddenly, words appeared before me out of nowhere, their lines falling slowly as if they were being engraved with fresh blood. Prove your loyalty, and follow us where we call. My breathing quickened, and before I could comprehend what was happening, there were knocks on the front door. They were slow and heavy, as if something massive was being hammered by a solid object, not a human hand. I stood frozen, my hand trembling, but my curiosity was stronger than my fear. When I opened the door, I found no one, except a dead black bird carefully placed on the threshold. Its beak was broken, and its left eye was pierced, as if someone had deliberately plucked it out. I slowly raised my gaze to find a symbol on the opposite wall that hadn't been there before, a circle with 3 twisting lines intersecting inside, resembling snakes in a tangle. Slowly, I reached out and touched the inscription. At that moment, a familiar voice exploded in my head, clearer than ever. Follow the sign. The test begins. As if my feet were no longer mine, I walked out of the house, propelled by a mysterious force. The dirt path I had walked thousands of times seemed alien, as if it hadn't been created for humans. The trees I had known since childhood were twisted, their trunks twisting like tortured bodies, their leaves rustling slowly, as if whispering about me. I felt as if I were being watched, not by one eye, but by dozens of eyes lurking in the shadows. After a long walk through the woods, I arrived at an old, abandoned cabin. It looked like it had died long ago. Its wooden walls were corroded, its windows were broken, and its hanging door swayed like a corpse on a gallows. Yet, I knew with certainty that this was the place the symbol had led me to. I stepped inside, and immediately a cold, harsh breeze pierced my bones. The smell that filled my nostrils was a mixture of mold and dampness, as if the place hadn't been inhabited for centuries. In the center of the hut was a large circle painted with a mixture of ash and dried blood, glowing dimly. Inside the circle was an old wooden chair, and above it stood a cracked human skull, radiating a dark aura. Before I could move, the door slammed behind me and closed. The light that had filtered through the cracks disappeared, plunging the room into darkness. Suddenly, the circle lit up in a glowing red, illuminating the space with a demonic light. The same voice echoed again, this time like an ear-piercing metallic screeching. The first test is to face your greatest fear. I didn't understand what it meant until the skull began to move. Slowly, it raised its head toward me, and from the hollow sockets of its empty eyes, a thick black smoke poured, gathering before me until it took on a familiar shape. My blood froze. It was my father's face. But his eyes were as empty as an abyss, and his voice came out distorted and broken. "Why are you searching for secrets, Rock? Why didn't you let me bury the curse alone?" My knees buckled, and I staggered back, but the face floated into the air and followed me. It resembled my father in every detail, except that his smile was distorted, cut off like a broken doll's. I couldn't look at him for long. I felt that if I looked any longer, I would fall into a dark abyss from which there was no return. Inside me, I heard the whisper growing louder. "If you run, you will fall. If you face, you will continue on." I shouted with all my might, facing the entity. "You are not my father. My father died with dignity, not a slave to shadows." The face suddenly exploded in a cloud of red smoke, and the ground beneath me shook as if it would swallow me up. I fell to my knees, but a strange warmth seeped into my veins, as if an ancient fire had taken up residence within me. The voice came back, clearer, closer, almost coming from within me. "I've passed the beginning, but there's still a long way to go, heir of the blood." I opened my eyes to find myself standing outside the hut, the forest around me silent once again. There was no sign of the circle, the skull, or the smoke. It was as if nothing had happened. But I knew I had changed, and that this was only the first step on a long road, a road leading directly into the heart of darkness. I didn't sleep that night. My body was stretched out on the bed, but my eyes remained fixed on the ceiling, following the darkness that slowly crept across the room. Every tiny whisper of wood, every faint rustle in the corners, seemed to me like a message from another world. I was no longer able to distinguish what was real from what might have been the product of my hallucinations, as if the lines between reality and nightmares were beginning to blur. As the night grew heavier, a strange image began to form in my mind, a long, dark corridor branching off from the heart of the house, resembling an ancient, never-before-seen vestibule, its walls cracked and stained with a deep blackness resembling the effects of a fire. Muffled murmurs echoed from within, overlapping voices, neither human nor animal, merely whispers seeping in like smoke. At first, I convinced myself that what I was seeing was merely an illusion, but as time passed, I felt as if unseen forces were actually drawing me towards it, pushing me with an irresistible pull. I got out of bed with heavy steps, as if my feet weren't my own. I walked through the dark corridors of the house, everything still, but inside me, there was an incessant noise. I stood in front of the antique wooden bookcase my family had inherited, and my fingers trembled. I'd always heard whispers of secrets buried behind those shelves, secrets that should never be revealed. I extended my trembling hand and pulled a worn book from the top corner. A hollow, mechanical sound emanated, and then the bookcase slowly moved, opening into a dark void that swallowed the view, a hidden passageway, just as it had appeared in my imagination. I advanced inside slowly, the sound of my footsteps echoing with a heavy thud, as if the walls were swallowing every sound and returning it distorted. Every time I stepped, I felt as if other breaths were accompanying me, drawing closer, mimicking my own, until I became certain that I was not alone. At the end of the corridor, a wide space opened into an underground hall. Its high walls were covered with strange, carefully engraved symbols, twisting shapes like snakes and flaming circles. In the center of the hall stood a massive stone altar, surrounded by a row of candles that had long since been extinguished, leaving behind the stench of burning wax and suffocating mold. I approached hesitantly, and each step felt as if I were being forcibly pulled away. I placed my hand on the cold surface of the altar, and suddenly a searing heat surged through my fingers, as if the stone were pulsing with life. Words that hadn't existed a moment before emerged from its surface, letters glowing blood red, as if awakened by my touch. Blood is the covenant. The soul is the price. And he who bears the name remains in darkness. My blood froze, and a shiver ran through my body from head to toe. I realized then that these words weren't just an inscription, but an ancient contract, a blood pact binding my lineage to a dark world. I hadn't just inherited a house, a library, or manuscripts. I had inherited an inescapable curse. At that moment, the air around me changed. It felt heavier, as if the entire room was closing in on me. I felt a cold breath creeping into my neck, and a whispering voice pierced my ear from somewhere very close, too close. "You're next, no more escape." My knees gave way, and I fell to the floor, panting, trying to convince myself that this was just a nightmare. But something inside me screamed, I'd crossed the line, opened the door that wouldn't close. The corridor wasn't just a corridor, it was the beginning of a path dragging me toward an abyss from which there was no return. I left there weighed down by a heavy burden, as if something had clung to my shoulders and wouldn't let go. Since that day, I've never seen the world the same. Every person I passed, every eye I met, I saw a strange shadow following them, a black specter moving lightly, visible only to me. I realized then that the demons were no longer behind the walls. They were now with me every moment, a part of my day, a part of me.